Are you ready for me to start?
Whenever.
All right. We will go ahead and get started. There are not that many people here, so we can have some one-on-one work today. We're going to write a policy, we're going to write a procedure, we're going to write a process during this. So we'll have a little bit of instruction on what the differences are of each of them, and then we're actually going to write. So get your computers out, get your paper out, and we'll be ready. I'm Susan Fenema. I'm the Chaos Eradicating Officer for Beyond the Chaos. And Beyond the Chaos helps small businesses with their operational and project management needs. We have been in business for about 2 years, but I have been a project manager for about 30. So we bring that operational experience. A little bit more about me. If you were in my session yesterday, I apologize for the repeat, but I'm non-technical and I'm non-certified. That is on purpose. I want to make sure that all of the process and project management is simple. It's not the complex, all the letters behind my name project management. I love technology. It's actually one of the things I help my clients do is bring technology in to solve their problems. So that helps me also relate to you guys who do it all the time. I'm also a home chef. And if you have ever tried to plan a 7-course dinner for 12 in an 800 square foot apartment, you will understand that project management also ties into that. So I get to use both of the things I love the most together in that hobby. I'm also the daughter, sister, and best friend of small business owners. So it's been in my blood for a long time. I love working with small business. I love to see the change effect that you can see when you're a small business on each other and on your clients. So that's why I choose to work mostly with very small businesses. So enough about me. I'm going to ask a few questions here of you guys. Who loves invoicing? We actually have people that love invoicing. Usually it is profit. If you can look at it from that standpoint, it's a little bit better. But for the most part, software developers, other small business owners as well, it's just something that you have to do. It's a pain. It gets in the way of the things you want to do. So one of the things we'll talk about is putting some structure around that to make it easy, to make it not become overwhelming. How do you remember when you're onboarding or offboarding a subcontractor or an employee, all the things you have to do? Do you read? You have your HR guy do it. That's also true. But there are a lot of steps that, especially for something like that, that for smaller businesses, you don't do this regularly. You might do it once every 4 months, maybe not even that often, and trying to reinvent that wheel can be challenging. You guys taking holidays? Or are you working right through them? Both? Okay. Is your business running you? Or are you running it? That's really what this is about, is making you in charge of it instead of letting it take over your life. And these things help you get there. So policy, procedure, and process, they all seem similar, but they're different. It really is the structure that helps you manage like you mean it. So without this structure, you're kind of just responding. The other thing, this is an added benefit, if you have this kind of structure around your business, when you're ready to retire, you have a business to sell, not a list of clients. You actually have something that you can sell to somebody that they can come in, see how you've done it, have a history, and be able to repeat your success. Makes it a little bit more valuable than just, okay, good luck, here's a client list, see if you can sell them. You know? So what's the difference? Policy is the rules. These are the things that there's really not a lot of discussion about. It's just what you're going to do. Procedure is a checklist. Very simple. You're just checking off the things down the list. A process is the system. This is usually handwritten, more detailed prose. And we're going to write each one of these today. So one of the things that you hear when you start to hear structure, especially as a small business owner, you start to hear, oh no, the bureaucracy, I don't want to deal with that. I want it to be straightforward. I just want to do what I want to do. But it's really needed because you want to have the ability to repeat those successes that you're good at, those things that you regularly accomplish and you're like, yes, you want to be able to do that again. And so if you have the steps in place, you're able to do it and remember how to do it the next time it comes around. You don't want to keep reinventing the wheel. This is what we're talking about with onboarding, right? All of those steps that you go through that every single time you have to remember what are all of them. This helps you not have to reinvent that. And you can start delegating. When you have the stuff written down and centralized, you have the ability to get a virtual assistant to come in and do that thing you hate, a bookkeeper to do your invoicing. But if you don't have that process written down, you can't teach someone else how to do it. Now, as developers, think about this too, surrounding your development process and maybe training up a younger developer. If you can write some of your thought processes down as you go, you can then pass that along to somebody else who might be able to help you serve your clients better. Other thing you get with structure is better client satisfaction. If you have a good project management process, your clients are not angry because they're always wondering what's going on. You get to the end, you know when to answer things. You are not responding to the squeakiest wheel, you're responding to the next priority. So that helps a lot if you have that structure. And the other thing that's going to result in, for those of you who loved invoicing, it's more profit because you're not scrambling around. Okay, so let's talk about policy a little bit. Policy, as I mentioned, is the rules and the structure. It's not how to do something. It's what you expect, really. It's not really negotiable. You don't really say, oh, I wonder if we should do it differently the next time. It's really just, hey, the holidays are this. This is your personal time off. This is the health care we offer. We always use Slack for internal communications. It's the rules of how you run your business. It's not really necessary if you're a one-person business because you make your rules for yourself, right? But you know what? I did. When I started my business, the policy I had were my holidays because I wanted to make sure that I could say to a client, no, we're closed that day, as opposed to just seeing how it went and then working through my holiday. So sometimes putting the rules on you helps you have a little bit better of a life too. It's not a bad idea, as I mentioned. So let's write one. Who in here use timesheets for their business? Does everyone use timesheets? Okay, if you use timesheets, let's write that one. If you don't, let's write one about your holidays. So the holidays you can do real simple. The timesheets, let's start looking at what are the things that are required. You have first, what program are you using? Where is the time supposed to be entered? I like Harvest. In my business, it's Harvest. When is time to be entered? Do you want it at the end of the week, at the end of the month? I want it at the end of every day, at the least. And that's your policy, right? In my company, you enter your timesheet at the end of the day, no later. Do you require timers? Some businesses, especially government agencies, actually need a start and a stop time on the report that they're going to get from you of your time billed. So set your timer. If you forget, then you have to have that policy of, you have to go in and enter your start and stop time. So that's something to go in there. If you're working with subcontractors, how do they bill you? What information do you need from them? Are they billing you monthly, weekly? How often are you going to pay them? What is required in their invoice? Those all are things that need to go in your timesheet policy. So, what other things can you guys think of that might be involved in that?
What you worked on.
What you worked on. What task you were performing. Were you doing consulting? Were you doing development, project management? Were you in a meeting?
Phone call.
What?
Phone call. You're on the phone.
Oh, phone call, right. The other is how much detail do you want? Do you want just the task name from your software, your project management software? Or do you need really detailed information? And do you want a paragraph or do you want 2 words? Making sure that all of the people who come in know what's expected of them helps you set the bar. And, you know, especially with an employee who's not doing a timesheet, that, you know, this is messing with your money, right? So make sure that with employees, you can actually write them up. Maybe it's even a fireable offense if they're not doing it properly, especially if they're putting notes in there that are going to the client that the client should never see.
Gosh, this guy's a butthole.
Right. You can't be calling your client names when you're filling out the timesheet. Okay, so that's a policy. Let's move on to a procedure. It is literally a checklist. Think about the airplane pilot taking off. He's, you know, are the flaps down? Do the tires have air? I'm not a pilot, so those things might not totally be correct. But they have a list that they go down, so they don't have to remember every time what all they have to check. Just check it off the list. So things that might be procedures. Onboarding, offboarding, and offboarding might actually be more important than onboarding. Because if you have somebody that you need to eliminate from your team, usually it's pretty quickly, and usually they have access to a lot of things that they probably shouldn't anymore. So making sure that you've pulled all those things off is important. Status meeting agendas. What are the things that you're always going to talk about in your status meetings? Maybe you add more if it's, you know, something else, but you're always going to talk about when's the next meeting, what's our progress against the milestones, what's our progress against the budget, demo a little bit of what we've done. Those are always the same things. Server maintenance. How often do you do it? What are the steps you go through to do it? Installing software, if any of you do that, I know that's not always a function you perform for your clients, but if you do, what are the steps that you follow? How to update your website? You know, how do you post a blog? These little things that are just checkoffs. So let's write one about onboarding a new subcontractor or an employee. So what's one of the first things we need? As Americans, what's the first thing we need? A social security or a W-2 or a W-9. I'm sure the Europeans have an equivalent. I don't know what it is. Yeah. How are you going to pay them? Is it going to be a direct deposit? Is it going to be a mailed check? If so, do you have the information? Get that information from them. Again, if it's a subcontractor, how are they supposed to invoice you? So making sure that they have that instruction. And now we're starting into a whole bunch of other things. Email. Are they using yours or are they using theirs? Phone system. Are you on a virtual phone system? Are you giving them an extension, or are they using their own cell phone to contact your clients? That's one of the things I would hesitate against, is having employees use their cell phone to contact clients, because then the client has that, and if they go away, they still have that. So something to keep in mind. Okay, so we did phone, we did email, access to your project management tools. If they are becoming an employee, what about, do you put them on your website? Do you need a bio? Are you publishing to social media that they have joined your team? What else do they need? Xojo licenses?
Physical access.
Physical access to a building if you are not a virtual business.
Source code access.
Source code access. What else? Details on the clients they're going to be working with.
Background checks.
Background checks if you do them. What else are we leaving off?
It's computer hardware.
Computer hardware. That's a big one. Are you providing it? Are they providing it? Do you have, rules of what they're required to have if they're providing it?
Dress code.
Dress code. Good one, if you have that. And sometimes with the dress code too, it might depend. Is it now dress code's a policy, but making sure they have it is on your procedure checklist, right? So, and your dress code policy might include, if you're in our office, we don't care, but if you go to a client, you need to dress like the client does in their office, however you set that up. You also might have access to a central Dropbox or Google Drive, those types of things. And access to where you're sharing all of your procedures and policies and all that information, all that HR stuff. So they need access to that. And I'm sure there are more that are specific. One of the things with a procedure, list everything you can possibly think of. And if it doesn't apply to that one person, well, then you can skip it. But it's harder to remember it than it is just to have it on the list. Okay, let's move on to process. Process is really more prose to document a system. It's how you do it. It's usually numbered steps or bullet points. It's going to be pretty detailed. Some examples of it might be what's your sales process? What do you do from the first time you talk to a new client all the way through to when you present the proposal? Maybe your sales process goes through getting paid. But that's an example of a process. How often are you following up? How are you making sure you follow up? Getting paid is a process. I get paid multiple ways. I do fixed prices. I do banks of hours. And I have one client that I bill after the fact. I won't ever do that again. When I'm done with this client, that's over. But I have a process for how I make sure that each of them happens regularly. My fixed price is easy. It's all the money up front. It gets paid and then I do their work. I love that because the money's out of the way. But that's part of the sales process. My banks of hours people, we have to refurbish those banks of hours. So I have a reminder every Monday. I go check their projects. I see where they are. I bill them if they're close. If there's a question, I might ask my project manager, hey, there's about 2 hours left. What do you see this week? Okay, yeah, you're going to burn them. I'll go ahead and invoice. But that's now a process that every Monday I'm checking on that so that it's not, oh yeah, you've burned through 3 banks of hours and I haven't billed you for any of them. And it doesn't become overwhelming. After the fact, we just bill every 2 weeks and send it in. So that's also a reminder, but never again. Won't do that ever again. Project management is also a big process. And if you missed yesterday's session on project management, go listen to it. I put a lot of information in there for how to build your project process. But that's an important process. And these 3 processes, I think everyone should have, whether you are your own person or you have a team of, 40. But even if it's just you, these 3 processes you should write down. You should at least have them cemented in your head of how you're consistently doing it. But I recommend writing it down. So let me give you a few tips on writing process. I have a system of recording myself explaining to an employee, or if not an employee, just record it as if you're explaining to an employee how to do it. Then I have that recording transcribed, and from there I write it up. And then I have someone else follow it. So, for example, social media is the thing I hate. I can't stand it. It drives me crazy, but it has to be done. It's an important part of your business to get that message out there. So I sat down with my virtual assistant and I did a Zoom recording and I walked her through, this is all of the social media platforms. This is how I use them. This is how often you post. This is the tool, we use Buffer. This is the tool you can use to go and post to all of them. I want them posted every Friday or scheduled every Friday. I'm going to review them every Friday afternoon to make sure that they're what I want to see next week. Go out. This is the place you can pull the information from. We recorded all that. We transcribed it. I actually had my project manager write up the process from the transcription. And then we gave it back to the virtual assistant to follow the next week. Worked great. My virtual assistant actually left me, gave it back to the project manager to do. She had no questions. She just followed it. So this is an easy way to get something that you don't know how to get out of your head out to have somebody help you with it. If you have something like that you need help on, this can work in your development world too. If there are little steps that you just wish if I didn't have to do this every time. Even if it's not to someone else, record yourself and transcribe it. It's a really great way to do it. I use rev.com, rev.com for my transcriptions. They do a very good job. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the minimum processes, sales, invoicing, getting paid, projects. So with projects, you want several parts of it that are important. Opening a project. How do you open a new project? This is consistent. You should be doing it every time, the same way. Just like, and you can actually write a procedure for opening a process or opening a project as part of your process. So your process can refer to procedures as a checklist. You would want a general structure with milestones. So that could be a template that turns into a procedure because it's kind of a checklist, or it can be written. This is how we do it every time and why. And then how you close projects is also important. Are you asking for referrals? Are you asking for permission to use your work in your portfolio on your website? Will they refer you to someone? All of these things are part of closing. So, what do you build processes around? Now, this is interesting too, because just how you do it is often affected by what you're using to do it. So, what software are you using to manage projects? If you're using Teamwork, your process might be different than if you're using Basecamp or Asana or a homegrown tool. A lot of process can fill gaps in software that doesn't have a certain part that you want. So maybe you need to fill the gap with a process. So think about that as what are the tools you're using? What's your CRM? This is going to maybe affect your sales process. Are you using HubSpot? Are you using HighRise? How does that affect your process? Are there tools in the software you're using that eliminates the need to have to write something down because that's how the software works? So that's helpful too. And then if you change software, you're going to have to relook at that process and mold it around the changed software. How do you manage your finances? Use QuickBooks, use FreshBooks. Are you invoicing out of Teamwork? There are many tools that you can use to manage those finances, and your process surrounding it is different. And then how do you get it to your accountant if you're not using a QuickBooks that they can log into? So that's another process that you can build. What's your time tracking software? Again, are you using Harvest? Are you using the Teamwork software? QuickBooks has one now that you can use directly there. That one's a little complicated. But what is the process then that you go through? Okay, great, I have everybody's time. How do I get that to an invoice? And it might be different depending on what software you're using. So software can drive your process. And that's something to think about when you're building software for people too, is how does it fit into their process? Is it changing their process? Do they need to revise process around it? Some good discovery questions to ask. Okay, so let's write one on this one. Let's write about getting paid. What software are you guys using to get paid right now? Homemade? Homemade? Same thing? Okay, so when you're using that, how do you get your information into your bank? How are you accepting payments? Checks, direct deposit, credit cards, PayPal? Okay. Do you upcharge for credit cards or PayPal?
If it's for hardware, yeah.
If it's for hardware, but not for service? Okay. Do you charge tax on anything that you're selling? If you have to, we have two that do. So how is all of that? Think about your process. How do you explain that to a bookkeeper that you might want to hand this off to? What do? We go into our time tracking. We pull the reports. And now, is your time tracking also in your homegrown tools over here?
Not really applicable.
Not applicable? Okay. So if it's in your homegrown tool, it probably works with it. If you're using something from the outside, you might have to pull it in. I use Harvest, but I pull it into my QuickBooks, and I build my invoice in QuickBooks, but I actually run the invoice in Harvest just so I know where I am in Harvest. But that's part of my process. Okay, so then when you send it to a client, does it go as a PDF? You mail it? I mean, some people might still mail things. Let's get it into PDF, guys. Let's also see if you can get a button for them to click to pay you. That's what I love about QuickBooks, is I have a button that okay, I'll pay you now. I actually have gotten paid in an hour of sending an invoice out before. It is awesome. The least work you can do for your client to let them pay you is important. Same thing with proposals or things they have to sign. You know, do you have a digital software for them to sign it through so that they don't have to print out the PDF, physically sign it, scan it back in, and send it to you? If they can hit a button and sign it, it makes it a lot faster. I like Adobe Sign for that. So back to our process. So now we've sent it to the client. What are we sending it with? Are we thanking them? We should be thanking them. Is there a specific sentence that we send? Is it on your invoice, or is it in the email that you're sending that communication? Both can be, because they sometimes get separated. In big companies, it might go somewhere else. What are your terms? Do you want them to pay you before you start work? Do you want them to pay you in 2 weeks, in 30 days? Man, if you're working with some government agencies, cross your fingers, it's less than 90, right? So what are your terms, and is that should be on your invoice? All of that can work with the tool you're using to build that invoice. Because Yes, if you were there, if you were in my session yesterday, you heard me say all of that information about what you're expecting as far as terms of payment should be in your proposal that they signed off. What else are we forgetting as far as in invoicing? What happens if you don't get paid? Right, that's part of your invoice process. Do you stop work? Do you give them a warning that you're going to stop work? Do you require 100% payment in full to begin again on the work? Those are part of your processes to make sure that you're following that up. And then if you do stop work, what is your process to notify your team to stop work? Are you somehow marking that in your software, your project management software that says on hold, don't touch? So that is your invoicing process. And if you do this consistently, you'll get the hang of it and you might not even have to look at what you wrote. But if you write it down, somebody else can help you. And that's a big step, especially on something that people don't like to do. So we've written a policy, we've written a procedure, we've written a process. Hopefully it's kind of expanded your mind of what else you might need written. What do you do with them? Where do you store them? So some of you might have a wiki. So I'm not sure that, they were real popular a few years back, but those might be going away a little bit. But you might have a wiki. That's it. If you have one, it should be there. Maybe it's in your project management software. That's where mine are. Mine are all in my Basecamp 2, which is what I use for my work. My work is very simple, so I do not need a really detailed project management tool. Basecamp is very great for a simple one. And it's in the text docs. It's not an uploaded Microsoft Word file or Pages file. It's in the text docs so that it can be searched in your tool. Google Drive is another way to do it if you're sharing a Google Drive. And of course, Dropbox, Box, any of those shared things. But if you're using those, you're going to have to put a little bit more structure around where to find them and that kind of thing. Please no 3-ring binders. One of the things about process is that when you create it, it is meant to evolve. So as you grow and as you change and as something new and brilliant comes into your head, that needs to be put into your process. So having it on paper, you can just mark it out. If you have it on a centralized digital location, you can update it. And I do suggest that you make a regular system out of updating your processes, whether that's every year to read through them, or procedures are a little bit easier because your checklists are right in front of you. And when you realize you forgot something, go add it to your template for your checklist so that the next time it's there. Onboarding subcontractors, the best thing to do after you build that checklist is duplicate it for offboarding. Now you know what you had them all signed up for, and you can then easily just go through the list and flip it to turn off or remove access. So you know where they are. Take them off your website. If you're firing someone, you probably do not want them on your website anymore. Okay, so we're gonna have Q&A here. Before we get to that, I do have a little special offer for you guys since you came to my session. We help build processes for your business. We will help you write them. I will include a free month of support, coaching, help after we write some, if you want to do that. Code is XDC2018, and I'll honor that through the end of June. So if you need help writing them, we do a really good job of looking at the way your company runs and then writing those processes specific for your company. But let's get to some Q&A. I'll ask you a question. Yes, back here. I'll answer you first.
for storage, you mentioned Google Drive, Dropbox, or something like that for shared locations.
Mhm.
What do you think of the? What do you think? How important is the audit trail on the modifications you make on these digital documents?
It's a good question. So the audit, you're asking about the audit trail, especially when you're using Google Drive or Dropbox, something like that.
Or even a wiki or something like that.
In a wiki. The audit trail is important. I do think it's important, especially since you're giving access to other people who aren't the ones who wrote it and might not be the ones in charge of it. Dropbox and Google Drive, they give you access to the previous versions. If you're using that, I think it even says who did it. If you're using your project management tool for that method, it will keep versions as well. And it's pretty obvious. It'll say such and such changed it on this date. That is, I think, very important because, if you have some person going off the rails, you want to know that they've done it. Now, of course, they could have also found a typo and gone in and fixed it, but many of them will tell you what was changed. If you're using it on a wiki, and if your wiki is based in WordPress or something like that, WordPress also keeps the versions. But keeping that access is important. Also lets you go back. If you've changed something and it didn't work, you can go back to the previous one. It's a good question. Sure.
This might be more project management, but when you're negotiating contracts or terms with the client,
Mm-hmm.
and documents are going back and forth, do you use document management, like, this might tie in a little bit, but to track strikeouts and modifications to your contracts? Do you require your contracts, or does your customer provide the contracts, or both, or how do you manage that part of the process where it's upfront, you're trying to come to terms?
Okay, so the question is about contract management,
Document
versioning.
management, right?
Versioning of the contracts and tracking the back and forth communications with your client. If you're using something like DocuSign, Adobe Sign, I like Adobe Sign, it's just very simple and straightforward. HelloSign does it too. You can track those versions, but sometimes you have to cancel them. There are some options in some of them to actually strike through things, and you can go back and forth until you get there. If you're just tracking it in Google Drive, versioning is good. If you have Teamwork and you're using Teamwork, it will actually track versions of uploaded documents. So if you're uploading that PDF that's been changed, or that Word or Pages document that's been changed, as long as the file name's the same, it will version it for you. I honestly don't care that much in my negotiations with that. I want to know what the final is. That's what we're working from. That's what we're living by.
Right, but if their legal team changed the clause,
You need to know that.
and is there anything specific that you're using to track that? Make sure that what they've signed is what you pass to them.
If you're doing it via PDF, you have to see the strike through. It'll show you the changes. I would give them something that is not editable, so that they can't change it without you knowing. And a PDF would do that. If you're looking at the digital software signature stuff too, you can't change it without notification. It will notify you.
Right, so you're passing them a signed document, and then they're re-signing it on their own behalf.
You can go back and forth until it's finalized, and it'll track it usually. And DocuSign, I think, does that more so because it's more for legal documents than just like proposals or standard contracts. Most of the time, I pull it down on mine. I pull it down and I make the modification and then resend it for them. But yeah, if you're going through a legal team, make sure that you know what they change, and make sure that they strike through it so that you're seeing that. If some legal teams will actually ask for a Word document so that they can track their changes for you. And that's also a method to do that, is just say, okay, it looks like a lot of changes. Here's the Word master. Please track your changes. so you don't have to go back and forth. Word also lets you compare the previous documents, so you can do that too. Anything else? We have a few more minutes.
So how do people handle changes, modifications versus part of the normal project? I mean, how detailed does that project have to be written up so that if they start adding things, then you have to go back and say, well, this is a change and it will cost more.
So this is a project management process question. How do you handle the change? At what point do you have to write it up? So my thought is that change should be written up if it does change the scope, if it does change the budget, or if it does change the timeline. So any of those three things should be written up. Now, scope is not necessarily changed if they want to make a teeny tweak. So that requires a little bit of judgment. And also, depending on who you're working with and how tight the timeline or how tight the budget is, how much leeway you're willing to give them. It might be different for different clients. But that does require judgment on the changes. But I would write it up and I would have them sign it. Even if it's just to say, hey, we're modifying this scope. It's actually not going to cost you any more money or take any longer, but it's different from what we originally agreed on. So make sure everybody's still in agreement with that. Anything else? So let me ask you a question. In your business, where do you find the biggest struggle of staying on track with something?
Getting called away on another project.
Interruptions? Okay.
Varying priorities, which is another kind of interruption. You get 6 concurrent projects and they're all from the same lead, the same client, and they start changing the priorities of them and wonder why none of them are done.
Right.
So,
I've had to have that conversation just before I left. What is your priority? Because you've got me working on 3 different things here.
Priority changes from the client.
Yeah.
Yeah, and interruptions. Those are 2 different, definitely I handle them 2 different ways. We'll take the client interruptions first. If you're having regular status meeting with your client, you should be able to prevent them from emailing and phone calling. Part of the project management process is to help eliminate those things. And if you're regularly meeting with your client and if they know what's going on, they're not going to bug you. I follow the philosophy of if they're asking you, it's probably your fault that you're not communicating it better, or they're worried about what's going on. So if you can proactively communicate with them, you will prevent some of those interruptions. Now, client changing their mind and priorities, that's just hard to manage. And part of that is telling them the consequences when they do change the priority. So, hey, I want you to stop working on this. This has become hottest. Okay, so this is no longer going to be done by Friday. We'll look at this now, and it will be done a week from today. So making sure that they understand the consequences of their request. And sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes they're just in the heat of the moment because their boss came into them and said, when am I getting this? And they don't understand that by saying, oh, I need you to work on this right now, that it is removing that deadline that you had already had planned. So that communication is what's most important when they change their minds. And it will happen, definitely. Sometimes they will even say, oh, no, it's not that important. I still needed that first. But if you're not giving them the consequences, they are not making the choice. You are making the choice. So serving them better puts the ball back in their court. We have anything else?
deal with one person.
Yes, that's a
Otherwise, you
really
have
great
might be
tip.
dead situation, and
dealing with one person at your client is really, that's a great tip. So that you have a project champion on the client side that is taking all of the requests. And the other thing about that too, if you're taking requests from anybody that wants them, did somebody actually authorize this? You know, is this approved by the people that are paying for it and that planned it with you? Or are you just responding to somebody who doesn't like that they have to change their software in the business? That's important, the one contact there. If you can't have one contact, because there are situations where you can't, make sure that you have them all in a regular status meeting together and that any changes that they all know about. At least that way somebody can say, no, don't do that, before you get there.
I think, what's your, I mean, one of the most important things that we do is to make sure the client has got a copy of our policy, if you like, terms and conditions.
Okay.
And it's worth spending money on that, not to cover the, it's usually 100 things you think are never going to happen, but when they do, you know, for instance, you're going to stop work or you're going to turn off their server. You know, in fact, you know, I don't know about in the US, but in the UK, you can't, unless you've told them that not paying the bill will mean that the server gets turned off.
You can't do it.
You're in danger of being sued.
So your question is, how do you handle getting terms and conditions to your client and getting their,
Yeah, what's your opinion on that?
on how you get their approval and that kind of thing, or at least that even, you know, let's face it, none of us read that. You scroll through it and check it off, but you're still held accountable if you do that. So I would send that document, if you have a terms and conditions document that's lengthy and it's a client contract, I would send that out for a digital signature through,
Sign it.
yeah, have them sign it. That's the way through. And if they want to send it to legal, be prepared for a delay. Also keep in mind too, that as you're trying to serve clients, if you're starting out by saying, here are all the rules and here are all the ways that if you're bad, you know, that might not be the best way to start a relationship.
Yeah.
And that's hard. So it really depends on who you're working with and how you're going to work with them. And if you want to educate them as you go and tell them, okay, we're getting now to the time where we're doing a setup on bug testing. So for the next 2 weeks, any bug you find, we'll fix it for free. If it's after that, we're billing you by the hour. Tell them that when you start that part of the process. Then it's not so overwhelming up front. So that communication can happen at the time that it's needed as opposed to one big, scary legal document.
Yeah, we've had cases where everything just grinds to a halt while, if you don't have one yourself, quite often you get given one from the client, and then you have to go through and remove all the things you don't like.
Yes. Terms and conditions, NDAs, those can be hard.
Make sure they haven't changed the terms and conditions.
Right.
They send it back to you.
Yes.
They're asking 3 times.
Making sure that they have not changed the terms and conditions when they sent it back. That's the same thing that we were talking about the legal stuff. And you know, if that's a ongoing problem, I would make sure your lawyer's looking at it when it comes back.
That becomes an issue.
And that becomes expensive, and it drags out the start of a project. That can be a mess.
Or just put those legal conditions online, let them sign it online, and put a timestamp on it.
That's true too.
They can't change that.
If you're sending it to them in a format they cannot change, a PDF, if you send them a PDF, they cannot edit it. There are ways, but I mean, most of them are not going to be that sneaky and go in there and do that. And probably,
I would be that sneaky.
you would be, but you're the software developer. Probably they are not even thinking they're being sneaky when they're doing it. They just say, oh, this doesn't work for me. And of course he will notice it when he gets it back. if that comes up, tell them you want them to track changes. You know, at some point, you have to have a trust with your client. And whether they signed the terms or conditions or not, you can still get sued. So, you know, keep all that in mind too. You might want to have even a money back guarantee as opposed to all of those terms and conditions, because let's face it, if you get to the end and you're sued, you still have the choice of whether I'm giving you your money back to make it go away, or we're going to go down a lawsuit. And sometimes having the terms and conditions might be more dangerous than a lawsuit. Maybe. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but it could be, because now you've agreed to something. Not agreeing to something might actually give you a little bit more leeway. I know some clients that don't use any sort of, you know, they do an email acceptance for a proposal, and then they start the project. So it all depends on how you work, and really, who are you working with? Who your client is more important in that, and that might be different for each client too. All right, I am out of time, but thank you guys very much for coming. And if you have any more questions, you can catch me today or you can email me. I'll be happy to help. Thanks.